The Legacy Superhero Season 1, Episode 4, Secrets and Sacrifice. Warehouse 19 looked pretty much what I expected it to look like. It was a huge warehouse, easily twice the size of my house and about 3 times as wide as my school's campus. It had probably looked really impressive in its heyday, but as I parked my bike in front of it and looked it up and down, I could tell that this warehouse had seen better days. Its exterior was rusted and dirty, while several of the windows near the top of the building that were busted out were so dirty that you probably couldn't even shine a light through them. There was also a lot of crude graffiti on the walls, including one that said injectors were here. Warehouse 19 wasn't alone, either. It was surrounded on all sides by other abandoned or rundown warehouses of varying sizes, with some smaller and others even bigger. Normally, I would have avoided this place completely. I didn't even tell my parents where I was going. I just told Mom that I was going to hang out with Kyle for the day. Dad had already left for work by the time I left, so I didn't need to tell him anything, but I still felt a little guilty about lying to Mom's face. But then I reminded myself that this was necessary, because I didn't want to tell her or anyone else in my family about my secret identity until I had my powers under control. As I climbed off my bike, the trickshot watch flashed again, and TW appeared beside me, looking up at Warehouse 19 with a beaming smile. "This is it," said TW. "What do you think about it?" "It looks like it's going to fall apart any minute," I said. I looked around. "Also, it's really quiet around here. Like, really quiet." "As I said, this part of town has been more or less abandoned for some time," said TW. "Even so, I would suggest not being too loud or boisterous in your training, because I don't want to attract the attention of the evil fire spirits that will consume my soul if I disturb their naps," I said. "Right?" TW rolled his eyes. "It's for your safety. Because of the age and decay, Warehouse 19 is not as stable as it looks. If you hit it too hard, it might collapse." I gave TW the thumbs up. "Don't worry about me. I'm always careful with my environment. Just ask my parents." TW looked at me as if he didn't quite believe me. "Well, it's good to see that you're confident. Perhaps that will make it easier to teach you how to use your powers, assuming your confidence doesn't become arrogance." "Well, why do I need to do this training at all?" I said. "I'm not against practicing my powers, but look at how easily I defeated those injectors yesterday. And that was my first time using my powers. I think I'm already pretty good at using them." "Because you had my help," said TW. "But the fact is that I'm not always going to be around to help you. Had I not been there, that fight likely would have ended very differently." "Wait, you're not?" I said. "Are you going to leave me? I thought you said you were built into the watch." TW scratched the back of his neck. "True, my AI does reside in the watch, but that doesn't make me immortal. You see, my AI is slowly fading away." "Fading away?" I said. "How does that make sense? If you're AI, doesn't that basically make you immortal?" TW shook his head. "No." He pointed at a broken-down car sitting not far from us. "See that car and how it is decaying? All technology decays with time. Even the best, most advanced technology that is meticulously taken care of and given the appropriate repairs on a regular basis will eventually stop working or at least become less effective than it once was." "So you're decaying like that car," I said. TW nodded. "Yes, I've been around for decades, and during much of that time, Gregory took good care of me, but my lifespan is nearly over. Gregory knows this, which is another reason he sent you the watch." I frowned. "How much longer do you have? Do you think you're going to go away soon or?" "I cannot say," said TW. "I may have as much as a year left, or as little as a month. It all depends on how much the rate of decay accelerates, which will happen if I am used too much." I was about to say that I didn't notice the decay, but then I noticed that the edges around TW's form were slightly fuzzy. It was a very slight effect, which I probably wouldn't have noticed under ordinary circumstances, but given what TW just told me, I realized that I was seeing his body decay right before my eyes. "But enough about my problems," said TW. "Let's enter the warehouse. I suggest taking your bicycle inside in order to ensure that it is not seen or stolen by anyone who might be around here." With that, TW disappeared back into the watch. Grabbing my bike's handlebar, I walked over to the entrance, pushed it open just enough for me to enter, and then went inside. As soon as I was inside, I closed the door behind me, leaned my bike against the wall, and turned around to see what the interior of the warehouse was like. As TW had said, Warehouse 19 was fairly wide open, with plenty of room for me to practice without fear of harming or hitting anything. It was dark, but growing lighter by the minute thanks to the light streaming in through the grimy, cracked windows above. An abandoned forklift stood in one corner, while at the very back of the warehouse was a staircase which seemed to lead up to the warehouse's office. Old chains hung from the catwalks above, while the smell of dust and mold filled my nostrils. Just like the exterior, it was very quiet in here, though I heard a rat scurrying around somewhere nearby when I took a step forward. A tall, cracked mirror stood off to the side, covered in grit and dust. Without warning, TW reappeared by my side and turned to face me. Now that we are here, it is time to begin your training. Open the watch and put on your suit. I held the watch up and flipped open the face to reveal that same red button that had saved my life yesterday, though it seemed like a lifetime ago now. This. Yes, said TW, nodding. You've pressed it before. Yeah, I know, I said. But is that all I have to do? Just press the button. Correct, said TW. It really isn't as complicated as it looks. You see, the watch contains the trickshot costume as a form of energy. When you press the button, the energy suit covers your body and then becomes actual fabric that conforms to your unique body shape. I figured as much, I said. All right, here goes nothing. I pressed the button. Like yesterday, bright blue energy rolled down my arm and over my entire body. In less than a second, I stood in the trickshot costume once again, standing before TW, who looked me up and down with an approving look on his face. Excellent work, said TW. You look just like Gregory, except younger. Thanks, I said. But I want to look at myself in the mirror first. I walked over to the cracked mirror I'd noticed earlier and stood in front of it. Yep, there was no doubt about it. This was the same costume grandfather wore in his superhero days. The TS emblazoned on the chest, the red and blue bodysuit, the goggles that obscured my eyes from everyone else, but enhanced my own vision. And even the long red cape I always thought looked cool. Never in my wildest dreams would I have thought I would become a superhero, but here I am wearing the same costume that grandfather had worn to take down countless criminals and supervillains over his 30-year-long career. This is so cool, I said, flexing my muscles and striking poses in order to test the suit's full range of motion. It's bulletproof, right? Right, said TW, floating over to stand behind me. Additionally, it is fireproof, waterproof, and can adapt to nearly any change in temperature. It is not, however, cut-proof, so I suggest avoiding enemies that use swords, knives, and other sharp weapons, or at least keep your distance from them. Oh, and I nearly forgot to add that the watch itself can change its form when you're not wearing your costume. That way, no one will know your trickshot when you're not wearing the costume. I stopped posing and looked at TW, a frown on my face. So I could get shot by a machine gun, and I'd be okay, but if someone stabbed me with a butter knife, I'd be in actual danger. TW shrugged. The suit isn't perfect. Frankly, I think you should just be happy it does everything else. Most superhero costumes cost an incredible amount of money for far fewer features than your suit has, while you got yours for free. You sound just like grandfather, you know that? I said. I was his personal assistant for 30 years, said TW. I may have picked up on a few nuggets of wisdom from him in that time. Right? I said. Anyway, what else can the suit do? Is that it? More or less, said TW. Aside from the powers it gives you, of course. Powers, I repeated. Super strength, durability, and perfect aim, right? Those were the powers grandfather had. Don't forget flight, TY said. You can fly as well. I can, I said. Cool, let me try. I jumped into the air as high as I could and then fell back down to the floor on my feet. What? I said, looking at my feet. Why didn't I fly? Because you will need to be taught how to do it, said Tiwo. Remember why we're here. You will learn how to do all of this in time. I looked up at TW, feeling slightly disappointed. But I don't get it. When grandfather passed the superhero exam, you said he got flight as his power when he was injected with superpower. So how do I have the same power if that's what grandfather has? It's another feature of the costume, said TW. It can actually copy whatever powers you have and make them part of the suit. That way, other people who wear the suit can use your same powers. You mean if I passed the superhero exam and got injected with superpower, that it would copy whatever power I got as a result of that, I said in surprise. TW nodded. Correct. But you are not going to take the superhero exam, at least not yet, so I wouldn't worry about that if I were you. I nodded to show understanding, but privately I was wondering if there were a limit to how many superpowers the suit could copy. If every single superhero in the country, or even the world, wore this suit just once, then anyone who wore it afterward would become the most powerful superhero on the planet. Not that I thought that would ever happen, of course, but it was still fun and a little scary to think about. Now, let us start your training, said TW. Come over to the center of the warehouse, where we will begin our first lesson. TW and I walked over to the center of the warehouse, kicking up dust and dirt as we walked. I coughed a lot, while TW, of course, was completely unaffected, which made me a little jealous of him, but I didn't say anything. We stopped in the very center of the warehouse and then stood facing each other like opponents about to wrestle. All right, I said, punching my fist into my open hand. Let's start the first lesson. Which power will I get to learn how to use first? Super strength, said TW without delay. He pointed at the abandoned forklift. Lift that forklift over your head once, and then put it back down. That seems simple, I said, but okay. Watch and be amazed. I walked over to the abandoned forklift. It wasn't a very big forklift. I'd seen bigger ones at Dad's construction sites, but it was definitely heavier than any normal human could hope to lift on their own. But with the trickshot costume on, I wasn't a normal human. I was a superhuman, a superhero to be more specific, and I could do things that most people only dreamed of. Stopping behind the forklift, I got a good, tight grip on its underside, and then lifted with all my might. But no matter how hard I tried to lift it, it wouldn't budge even 1 inch off the concrete floor of the warehouse. I struggled, grunting loudly under my breath the entire time, but the forklift stayed stubbornly where it was. Having trouble, said TW, hovering behind me like a ghost. I looked over my shoulder at him in annoyance. Yeah, why can't I lift it? I remember using my super strength yesterday to send one of those injectors flying. So why can't I do the same to this stupid forklift? Because, like I said, I was helping you yesterday, said TW. You must put more focus into lifting the forklift before you can use your super strength. It's not a very difficult skill to learn, really, but it does require some effort to do. How do I focus? I said. Do I just close my eyes and try really, really hard, or is there more to it than that? You're not far off the mark, said TW. He tapped the side of his head. First, you must focus on activating your super strength. Force your super strength to manifest in your body. Tell the costume to fill your body with the strength to lift this forklift. Command it the way a general commands his army. Don't let any hesitation enter your mind, otherwise it won't work. All right, I said, standing up and dusting off my suit. Let me try to command my costume to give me my super strength and see how that works. I closed my eyes and focused as hard as I could on my costume. It was kind of awkward at first, because I felt like I wasn't really doing anything initially except just standing there in the warehouse with my eyes closed. It didn't help that the idea of talking to my clothes seemed more than a bit ridiculous. But then I felt the costume. I felt the way it covered my body and the powers that were at its command. I knew that those powers could be mine, but only if the costume would give them to me. So I said, in my mind, give me my super strength. Give it to me now. No response from my costume. Frustrated, I opened my eyes and looked at TW. It's not listening. Try again, said TW. The costume doesn't know you, so it isn't inclined to listen to you the way it listened to Gregory yet. Just command it more forcefully. It responds to strength, not weakness. Strength, not weakness, I repeated. Okay, let me try again. I closed my eyes and felt the costume again. Give me my super strength. I want it now, not later. I command that you give it to me. Again, no response. This time I was sure that the costume heard me, but for some reason was just ignoring me. It was probably because it didn't know me yet, like TW said, but I still felt frustrated at its obstinacy. It reminded me of a puppy that won't listen to its owner, so I'd just have to be tougher. Listen here, you stupid costume, I said. I know I'm not grandfather and I know that you don't trust me because of it. But guess what? I'm your owner now, so you have to listen to me even if you don't like it. Got it? Still no response. I was frustrated enough to seriously consider taking off my suit and trying again another day, because I was starting to lose my patience with this costume, and I didn't want to keep telling it what to do fruitlessly like this. But then it occurred to me why the suit wasn't listening to me and what I could do to get it to pay attention to my commands. So I said, "Okay, I know you probably miss Grandfather because you were his costume for 30 years, which is a pretty long time to work alongside someone. But Grandfather gave you to me because he wants me to use you to save Rumsfeld from the injectors. If you don't do what I tell you to, Grandfather will be very disappointed in you, and you don't want to disappoint him, do you?" Once more, no response. That was almost enough to make me rip off this dumb costume and throw it away. But then, without warning, strength flooded my limbs, and I suddenly felt like I could lift the entire warehouse over my head. My eyes popping open, I grabbed the forklift with both hands and lifted it above my head, yelling all the while. The forklift weighed practically nothing in my hands. I almost threw it away, but then remembered what Tiwa told me about being quiet, and so I gently rested it back on the floor where it had sat before. I stood back up and turned around to face TW, who was looking at me with an impressed look in his eyes. "Impressive," said TW. "How did you master it so quickly?" I shrugged. "I just told the costume that Grandfather would be disappointed if it didn't help me. I'm surprised it worked myself." "Interesting," said TW, though he seemed to sense something more in that than I did, based on his tone. "Well, let's resume our training. You need to be able to call upon your powers consistently, so keep lifting the forklift. We'll do that until lunch, and then take a break." I nodded and turned around to pick up the forklift again, but at the same time I couldn't help but think about what TW found so interesting about how I managed to get the suit to work for me. Maybe there was more to this costume than met the eye. By the end of my first lesson I felt great. Though the suit was still rather finicky at times, it didn't want to give me strength, and at other times, my super strength would nearly give out while I was lifting the forklift over my head. I had still made a remarkable amount of progress in a fairly short amount of time, according to TW. He mentioned that Grandfather mastered the watch faster than me, but he said I did well nonetheless. We decided to take a quick lunch break. I had packed a peanut butter sandwich and chips for lunch, but I was still very hungry even after eating that. "Not surprising," said TW when I mentioned that. "You did a lot of work today. You should probably have a larger than usual dinner tonight in order to make up for all of the calories you burned." Sitting on an overturned crate, I sipped my soda and nodded. "Yeah, I think I will. But if I keep working like this, will I get big and buff?" "The costume isn't magic," said TW, floating next to me. "It won't grant you muscles like that. To build muscle, you need to eat good foods, work out, and get plenty of sleep, regardless of whether you have powers or not." I frowned and looked at the forklift, which no longer looked quite as intimidating as it did before. "Yeah, I guess you're right. But if I can master this suit, then I won't need to hit the gym to get strong, right?" "Right," said TW, nodding, though I recommend maintaining a strict training regimen nonetheless. There will be times where you won't always have access to the watch, so learning how to defend yourself when you are not in costume is important. "What, are you a personal trainer now in addition to being an alien AI?" I said jokingly, "because you sound just like the guy who trained Thomas for a while there." "Thomas?" TW repeated. "Who is Thomas?" I tilted my head to the side. "You mean you don't know who Thomas is? He's my oldest brother. Or was, I should say, before he died." "Ah, now I remember," said TW, nodding. "Gregory told me that he had 2 grandsons, though he didn't tell me what happened to Thomas." I looked away, trying not to show any emotion. He injected himself with an illegal dosage of power. It was too much for his body to handle, and he died. "Oh," said TW, "I'm sorry to hear that. Is that common?" "Sort of," I said with a shrug. "Lots of people just want to become superheroes, but either can't or don't want to pass the superhero exam. So they go to the injectors to get power, but it rarely works out." "Is that what Thomas wanted?" said TW, "to be a superhero, but without first passing the superhero exam?" I folded my arms in front of my chest. All I know is that he was desperate. He'd been fired from his job, broke up with his girlfriend, and had other problems too. I think he turned to power because he thought it would solve his problems. "Why didn't you or your parents offer to help him?" said TW. "Surely he could have stayed with your family while he was trying to get back on his feet." We did offer to help him, I said. But Thomas didn't want our help. He and Dad, they had a falling out when he graduated from college. May I ask what they fought about? Said Tiwoyu. Or is that private? No, I can tell you, I said. You see, Thomas wanted to become a superhero, but Dad was against it, because he didn't want Thomas to go through the same things grandfather did. He wanted Thomas to go into construction like him, not try to follow in grandfather's footsteps. Why didn't your father want him to follow in Gregory's footsteps? Said Tiwoyu. I was under the impression that most people are proud to be the children of superheroes. I'm not entirely sure, I said. I think Dad just didn't like growing up with a superhero dad, because grandfather wasn't always around or something. All I know is that the two had a big fight, which I think was probably one of the reasons Thomas took power. So you think your father would not be very happy if he learned that you are the new trickshot? Probably. I shrugged again. But it's too late now. I'm going to use this costume and these new powers to take down the injectors. If I can do that, then we'll finally have some closure over Thomas. Yes, I remember you telling Michael Jones that you were declaring war on the injectors, said TW. I didn't know you meant it literally, however. I looked at TW. Why wouldn't I mean it? The injectors are evil. If they hadn't been around, Thomas would still be alive. So would a lot of other people, actually, because their drugs have ruined the lives of countless families. The police haven't been able to stop them, and neither has Bugbite, so it's up to me to do it. That seems like a big responsibility for a 16-year-old boy to take on his shoulders, said TW. Perhaps too big for someone your age. You yourself said that grandfather sent me the watch so I could defend Rumsfeld from a threat, I said. I held up the trickshot watch. And the injectors are definitely a threat to Rumsfeld, no matter how many there are. TW frowned, as if he was not entirely convinced about that, but I didn't care. It wasn't like TW could stop me. Even if he tried, I would just stop him, because I had zero interest in hearing him or anyone else tell me how I should use these new powers when I knew quite well what to use them for. Be that as it may, it will be a while before you are fully ready to handle the injectors in a fight again, said TW. You still need to master your powers, as well as gain some real fighting skills. How long will that take? I asked. No idea, said TW. It all depends on how much effort you put into it. You've already displayed a small amount of talent, but you are still quite a ways off from being ready to take on the injectors in a fight again. I bit my lower lip, but said nothing about that. TW was right. If I wanted to fight the injectors again, I would just have to work even harder than I already was in order to master my powers faster. By the time I was done with my training, I would definitely be a force to be reckoned with, one that would make even the injectors shake with fear. Of course, if the injectors were smart, they'd be afraid of me already, but no one ever said those guys were smart. My phone started ringing in my pocket. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, saw that Mom was trying to call me, and answered the phone, saying, "Hi, Mom, what's up?" "Jack, are you all right?" said Mom in a worried voice. "Are you and Kyle safe?" "Me and Kyle?" I said before I remembered the excuse I gave Mom earlier and quickly said, yeah, we're okay. What's the matter? Has something bad happened? Did the injectors attack again?" "No," said Mom. "It doesn't really have anything to do with the injectors, but it also does have something to do with them." "Mom, you're not making any sense," I said. "Look, you're obviously letting your emotions mess with your thinking, so I'll just hang up and head back home and we can talk there, okay?" "You should come back home, but I still need to tell you about what I just learned first," said Mom. "The police called to follow up on the injector attack yesterday." I frowned. Why would they feel the need to follow up again? I already spoke to that Christina lady. What else could we possibly tell them? Did any of the guys they arrested spill the beans on the injector's plans? "No," said Mom. "At least, not as far as I know. I told them what you told me, about Christina coming over to our house for the interrogation, but they were surprised to hear it." "Surprised?" I said. "Why, if Christina works for the police?" "That's just the thing, Jack," said Mom, fear rising in her voice. "The Rumsfeld City Police Department had a Christina Madison working for them as a detective 10 years ago. "Wait, you mean the woman we spoke to is retired?" I said, glancing at TW worryingly, and they didn't know it. "Not retired," said Mom. "Dead. The real Christina Madison died 10 years ago in a car accident while chasing down a suspect. The woman who spoke to us and interrogated you, she's not with the police at all. That Monday, when the lunch bell rang, I was among the first students to leave my classroom and get my lunch from the cafeteria. I wasn't particularly hungry, because I'd had a big breakfast of bacon and eggs before I left for school this morning, but I just wanted to make sure I got my table, which was in the upper right corner of the room away from all of the entrances. That was where Kyle and I normally ate lunch, but it was even more important that I get that spot than normal, because I wanted to be able to keep an eye on all of the entrances, exits, and windows of the cafeteria. Looking around the large cafeteria that was rapidly filling with hungry students, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. There was Ryan Bond with his girlfriend Steph, as well as his other jock friends, getting lunch at the cafeteria. Near the main entrance was Mrs. Helga, the English teacher, who also pulled double duty as the cafeteria security, and out the window, I saw the large oak tree which had been planted in front of Rumsfeld High over a century ago, which was a favorite eating place for a lot of students due to how shady and cool it was. Everything looked as it should, but I didn't let my guard down whatsoever. As I started to eat my soup, I thought about the conversation I'd had with Mom back on Saturday about the mysterious Christina Madison. According to Mom, the last Christina Madison who worked for the Rumsfeld City Police Department had died 10 years ago during a car chase. Furthermore, the police confirmed that no one with that name was currently working for them, much less as a detective whose job was to follow up on these kinds of cases. That meant that someone had impersonated Christina Madison and used a fake police badge to trick us into letting her into her home to talk about a case that the police were still investigating themselves. At this point, no one knew for sure who this Christina Madison lady really was, but I was already assuming the worst, namely, that Christina was an injector agent who was trying to find out who Trickshot really was. It was very probable that the injectors were looking for Trickshot in order to avenge their friends who were currently rotting away in prison, because the injectors were well known for forgiving those who harmed them. I had gotten really lucky by not revealing to Christina who I really was. Even so, I had become somewhat paranoid ever since Saturday, keeping my eyes and ears open for any signs that the injectors were following me. Every bustling bus, every creaking tree limb, every footstep behind me would make me jump or look twice, only for it to turn out to be nothing other than a cat or another person. This paranoia wasn't doing me any good, but at the same time I felt like I couldn't be too careful, because I'd heard a lot of stories about how the injectors kill people they don't like, and I didn't want to be another one of those stories that circulated in my high school. Yes, I had the Trickshot watch, which meant that I was not nearly as defenseless as most people, but at the same time, I wasn't invincible. The injectors got a glimpse of my power when I took out all 7 of their men, which meant that they were probably packing more power than normal in order to take me down. I would be safe as long as they never suspected me of being Trickshot, but if they ever found out my identity, then I would be in for the fight of my life. "Hey, Jack," said Kyle suddenly, dropping his tray on the table and plopping down in his seat directly in front of me with his usual cheerfulness. "When I saw you get out of class earlier, I thought you really needed to use the bathroom, but when I saw you in the cafeteria, I realized that you just wanted to get here before everyone else. Not that I blame you, cause lines suck, especially lines for school lunches." I almost started when Kyle sat down, but then realized who he was and sat back down on my seat. "Sorry about that. I just, wanted to get the best stuff before everyone else gobbled it up." "Hey, I'm not blaming you," said Kyle as he opened his soda can and sipped it. "I should have done what you did, but I got caught up discussing whether or not superpower would give the same power to twins with Mr. Ferguson." Mr. Ferguson was the science teacher who had also been a superpower scientist in his youth. It didn't surprise me to hear that Kyle had been talking with him about that subject. Kyle, after all, wanted to become a superpower scientist himself someday. "So what did you two figure out?" I said as I scooped up some mashed potatoes from my plate. "Yes or no?" "We didn't figure out anything," said Kyle. Mr. Ferguson said that there hadn't been a case of twins being injected with superpower, despite how long the drug has been in use, but he did give me a link to a new study on siblings who were both injected with the drug. Not quite the same thing as twins, but I guess the same principle more or less applies. Ha. "Right?" I said, glancing toward the entrance again. "Maybe that's something you can study when you become a scientist." "Hey, why not?" said Kyle with a shrug. "It might lead to new breakthroughs in the science of superpower. If that happens, don't worry. I won't forget you or any of the other little people who supported me, though I'm going to have to charge you for an autograph if you ask." I rolled my eyes but saw something out of the corner of my eye and looked to the right. 2 students sat at a table not far from ours with a tiny red laser dot, which they were using to tag a guy sitting at the table next to theirs. The guy didn't seem to notice because he was too busy stuffing his face with food, but the 2 girls were giggling at the red light, which they flashed on and off rapidly. "What are you looking at?" said Kyle. He looked in the direction I was looking and frowned. "Just a couple of girls being girls, not sure what's so interesting about them." Nothing," I said, looking back at Kyle. "I just thought I saw something." "Like what?" said Kyle in between French fries. He paused and smiled. "You didn't think you saw Deborah, did you?" What?" I said. "Deborah Ackerman," said Kyle. "You know, the girl you're head over heels in love with." I looked around the cafeteria again when he said that and noticed Debbie immediately. She was still in line with her friends, laughing and joking about something I couldn't hear over the sounds of the cafeteria, but even from a distance, she looked really beautiful, especially her green eyes. But then I shook my head and looked at Kyle. "It's not Deborah. It's nothing." Kyle smirked. "Come on, Jack. I know you well enough to know when you're lying. You're clearly afraid of something, and unless you're just really paranoid, I bet it's something real." "Real?" I said. "What do you mean?" "Like the injectors," said Kyle. "Or Principal Jacob, though given how the principal is currently at home because of the flu, I'm thinking the injectors are more likely." "How could you tell?" I said. "Because you survived the injectors," said Kyle. He wiped his mouth with a napkin. "And if there's one thing I know about the injectors, it's that they don't like anyone who manages to escape them, even if you weren't the one who beat up all those guys." I slumped forward against the table slightly. "You're right. I've been worried about the injectors attacking me if I let my guard down, and not just because I survived that one attack, either." I told Kyle about my encounter with Christina Madison and the subsequent phone call from the police that proved she was a fake. Behind his large glasses, Kyle's eyes grew wide with worry. "Uh-oh, that doesn't sound good." "It's not," I said. "And I suspect that this woman, whoever she really is, works for the injectors. They're trying to find the guy who saved me so they can kill him, but I bet they're going to try to kill me too." "No doubt," said Kyle. "By the way, do you know who saved you yet? I've heard rumors from all over, but no one seems to agree." I hesitated, wondering whether to tell Kyle about Trickshot or not. I didn't see any harm in telling him who saved me, because it wasn't like admitting that I was Trickshot. So I said, "It was someone dressed up as Trickshot." "You mean the rumors about Trickshot saving you are true after all?" Kyle repeated. "Wasn't that your grandfather's superhero identity?" I nodded. "Yeah, don't ask me how this guy got my grandfather's costume, because I don't know." "Maybe it actually is your grandfather," said Kyle, leaning forward excitedly. "Maybe he's finally came back from wherever he disappeared to in order to save you from the injectors. Did he look like your grandfather?" "Not really," I said. "He's different. Someone else. My actual grandfather is probably too old to fight anymore anyway. It has to be someone else." "If you say so," said Kyle, leaning back again. "Still, this is wild. Someone is running around Rumsfeld wearing your grandpa's old costume, maybe even with his same powers, and he's taking down the injectors left and right." "He's just taken down 7 of them so far," I said. "Not exactly the same as taking down all, or even most of them." "I know, but it's still great news to hear," said Kyle. "If there are 2 superheroes in Rumsfeld, then that makes it twice as likely that the injectors will be taken down. The only question I have is whether or not this new Trickshot has a superhero license." "Probably not," I said. "Bug Bite is supposed to be the only licensed superhero working in Rumsfeld. If there was another, we'd definitely know." "So he might be an illegal superhero too," said Kyle. "Man, the plot just thickens, doesn't it?" "It does," I said, "and maybe not in a good way, either." "We'll see how it develops," said Kyle. "Personally, though, I have a good feeling about this new Trickshot. If his first public act is saving a high school student from a bunch of injectors, then he has to be good for the city, right?" "Of course," I said. "I just wish that I didn't have to worry about the injectors coming after me. I mean, I don't think they actually will, given how I'm not nearly as big a threat to their operations as Trickshot is, but still." "True, but as long as you're careful, you should be fine," said Kyle. "Maybe you could ask the police to patrol the streets around your house for a while, at least until the injectors are no longer a threat." "I'll have to mention that to Dad," I said. I ate a spoonful of mashed potatoes and swallowed. "It's a good idea, though given how dangerous the injectors are, I'm not sure if it would be of much use." "It's just a suggestion," said Kyle with a shrug. "If you really wanted to find out if the injectors are after you or not, you could always ask." "Ask?" I said. "Ask who?" Kyle suddenly looked down at his French fries, like he had just said something he wasn't supposed to. "Oh, it was nothing. I was just thinking aloud. That's all." No, Kyle, you obviously meant what you said, I said. Who should I ask if I want to find out if the injectors are after me or not? Kyle looked around quickly, as if to make sure no one was eavesdropping on us, and then leaned forward and whispered, I heard on the grapevine that some of the students here are going to meet with some injectors to buy some power. Which students? I said. And when is this meeting? I'm not entirely sure who, but I think it might be Ryan and one of his friends, said Kyle, glancing over his shoulder at the table where Ryan and his friends sat eating and laughing with each other. And it's supposed to be tonight at midnight in the old car factory that shut down a few years ago. Supposedly, Ryan and one of his friends are going to buy some power from the injectors. Why would they do that? I said incredulously. They were threatened by the injectors on the bus just like us. Why would anyone be stupid enough to do that? I'm not sure, said Kyle. Like I said, I just heard about it on the grapevine. It might not even be true. It's connected with the rumors that Ryan is the one who had the thing that the injectors were looking for when they stopped the bus. I looked over at Ryan's table. Ryan's back was to me, so I couldn't see his face, but his physical gestures and tone told me that he was his usual boisterous self. I guessed that he didn't let something like having his life threatened by drug dealers to be that big of a deal, or maybe he was just hiding it. Regardless, I found it hard to believe that even someone as dumb as Ryan would be stupid enough to buy power from the injectors, especially after Mattis got arrested for it. And you think I should go to that meeting and ask the injectors politely if they're trying to kill me? I said, looking at Kyle in disbelief. Kyle held up his hands defensively. Like I said, I was just thinking out loud. It would be extremely stupid of you to go to any meeting with the injectors, whether alone or with someone else. The smart thing to do is to avoid going into any dark alleys and try to stay close to home as much as possible. I nodded and returned to eating my mashed potatoes, thinking about what Kyle said. Yes, it would be smarter or at least safer to stay home tonight and not go and do anything dangerous. The injectors were cold-hearted killers in addition to being ruthless drug dealers, and if they saw me, they'd probably kill me without even thinking about it. But the brave thing would be to don my trickshot costume and head out to the old car factory tonight without telling anyone. Regardless of who was going to this meeting, this would be my chance to get closer to locating Michael Jones. If I was lucky, Jones himself would be there tonight. And if I wasn't, well, beating up injectors was quickly becoming my favorite pastime anyway. The end of the Legacy Superhero Season 1, Episode 4, Secrets and Sacrifice.